That's a lot to do. So I wanted to make sure that I say hi. Yeah. Well, it's funny because Meserve, but I know, yeah, no. Oh. Oh, that's okay. Yeah. I'm gonna have you two guys. Are having lunch, or you? I had a late. Oh, that's nice for you. I'm trying to like not get run over by this truck. Oh, we kind of like a very fine. Ah. Yeah, which is kind of true in a way. Oh, here, except for Hannah Gardiner, one of our students, who's like so like. Dr. Holdren. There was some urgency, especially if he wants to really. I know. Yeah, that's right. I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer. Five and six. So. Oh, no. I know. He was just asking me.
I don't know what to do. I haven't heard of it.
We found a great replacement. We only do
I have
one.
one.
Role models. Preaching. Science. Oh yeah, together. Exactly. Plenty of time. Waiting on one of our students. I was right. Okay, that's good. That's good. That's the agenda. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to our Science and Security Summit 2017. And this is actually the first one of these we've done. If this goes well, hopefully you'll have one of these again next year and years to come. So I'm Charles Ferguson. Those who don't know me, I'm the president, Federation of American Scientists. And I'm going to just give some opening brief remarks just to let you know the order of events over the next 2.5 hours. And we have a great set of speakers coming up. You have their biographies in front of you, so I'm not going to read them to you. I'll hit some highlights of each speaker as they come up to speak, but I want to make sure we save as much time as possible for the speaker's remarks and for your questions, so you have time as an audience. I think we have a number of noted experts and colleagues in the audience, and we want to hear from you as well as hearing from our all-star lineup. So there's been some slight changes to the agenda. Good news is we have 5 of our 6 speakers here. We're waiting on one of our speakers, Hannah Gardiner from, oh, she made it. Yes. Oh, good. Well, hey, things are just going so well. It's been perfect. Thank you, Hannah. So forget what I was going to say. So we have all our speakers, and but we're going to still stick to a slightly altered agenda. I think it makes somewhat more sense. We're going to have Dr. John Holdren speak at the very end, starting at 2:30. Give him time because he has a lot of big ideas he wants to present. A roadmap forward, dealing with nuclear energy, climate change, those related issues. Look for those remarks. And first up, we will have Dr. Rodney Wilson and then Dr. Richard Meserve talking about their excellent work on some specific issues dealing with security, and with Dr. Meserve, nuclear safety issues in Japan. A lot of work he's been doing the last several years since the Fukushima accident. And both of them could give a seminar that could last all day with their wealth of knowledge and experience. So we're trying to condense 6 speakers in just a couple of hours. So, strap in your intellectual safety belts because it's going to be quite a ride. So in just a couple of minutes, we'll have Dr. Rodney Wilson come up and start his remarks. We already have his slides queued up. And I want to give some safety announcements. And I think you'll all see the exits and the worst case scenario, there's some kind of fire, some event here. Please follow that orderly. Don't take the elevators. We're only on the 2nd floor. We can calmly walk down the steps. Another important safety announcement, because we are filming this event, please exit along the aisles. And when we do the question and answer period, we'll have a couple of roving microphones. When you get the microphone, please clearly state your name and affiliation and clearly state your question. And really keep it focused to a question. Don't make a lot of comments. So we have time for other people to ask questions. I want to thank our sponsor, our key funder, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. A lot of this event is about our nuclear education project, where we're trying to understand what nuclear policy work is being done at the United States' top universities on nuclear science and engineering. And we'll have 3 graduate students speaking in about an hour and a half on that particular topic, their particular work at 3 of those institutions. And I want to thank some key staff members of FAS, Frankie Guarini. I think a lot of you have interacted with Frankie, probably through emails or maybe even through Facebook. We got some attendees through Facebook. We're trying that for the first time ever. We're getting up on social media now at FAS. Wow, 21st century. So thank you, Frankie. And I want to thank Pia Ulrich, who has handled a lot of the logistical issues. And I also want to thank just other FAS staff and senior fellows for their overall support for all the work that we do. And I'd also want to give a nice thank you, a shout out to Dr. Rosina Bierbaum, our vice chair from University of Michigan. Thank you, Rosina, for helping get John Holdren to come in as our speaker. And I want to finally thank Stephen Horowitz, who was a student intern we had last summer from Texas A&M. And Stephen was a great advisor in helping us find some of our student speakers and getting our nuclear education project up and running last year. And so with that, let me invite Dr. Rodney Wilson, to come up and give his remarks.
Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Charles, and the Federation of American Scientists for inviting me here today to talk a little bit about, from our perspective at a national lab, the roles that scientists and engineers play in improving our global nuclear security. At Sandia Labs, the Center for Global Security and Cooperation that I lead is involved in pretty much all facets of global nuclear security. And with the time I'm going to spend, I'd like to share a little view of how we view our mission and provide some examples of some of what we've been doing in terms of technology development and engaging the larger scientific community. We're all, of course, aware that nuclear security is not new. The International Atomic Energy Agency's activities in nuclear security date back to the 70s when the agency began providing ad hoc training courses and physical protection of nuclear facilities. However, after 9/11, it became very clear that much more needed to be done to protect both nuclear and other radioactive materials from malicious acts and actors. In fact, in 2002, the IAEA embarked on its first comprehensive program to combat the risk of nuclear terrorism by assisting states in improving their nuclear security. Prior to that, I think security had been taking some of a back seat to safety and safeguards. But security continued to rise in terms of its importance. I think President Obama's Prague speech moved it right to from being a mundane aspect of operations to a matter of concern that for the first time, drew personal attention from world leaders, which was a very good thing. In fact, it was in Prague that President Obama stated that the technology to build a bomb has spread. The terrorists are determined to buy, build, or steal one. And that our efforts to contain these dangers are centered on a global nonproliferation regime. But as more people and nations break those rules, we could reach the point where the center could not hold. And that we must ensure that terrorists never acquire a nuclear weapon. This is the most immediate and extreme threat to global security, and so on. And I think when he went on to announce a new international effort, setting new standards, expanding our cooperation with others to pursue new partnerships, and lock down the sensitive materials of concern. But in the end, he sort of talked about expanding the view of what was needed by making sure that we could break up markets to detect and intercept materials, and finally use financial tools to disrupt this dangerous trade of materials. So today, our national laboratories, NGOs like FAS and others, our partners, both here and abroad, have come together, I think, to address nuclear security through a lot of technology development, creating centers of excellence, new educational programs. Glad to see students here because I know the NNSA has created a number of educational programs through consortia involving universities like the Center for Verification Technology led out of the University of Michigan. And all of this aimed at creating a more informed public, a better pool and source of new science and technology, and finally to help push some of and strengthen some of our norms. The IAEA Director General Amano recently noted that the primary responsibility for nuclear security lies with each individual state. But the threat is global, and it requires a global response. So one of the ways that IAEA contributes is by bringing together political leaders and us, the technical experts, to share an experience and learn from each other so that we can build an international regime. I'm going to show a couple of charts that describe how I think about nuclear security and then some of the key elements of what I think are required. One view is sort of along a timeline. At one end of the timeline, you find yourself worrying about prevention, encountering threats. You see folks developing technologies to respond, and then ultimately to recover and restore society after an event, whether it's been significant or not. And all along the way, there is a role for folks to try to develop a better situational awareness of what's going on and to be able to anticipate future threats and future problems. Now, my remarks are going to mostly be focused on prevention. That's what we do a lot in my organization to prevent the misuse of nuclear and radiological materials by state and non-state actors who are attempting to perpetrate acts of terrorism or proliferate weapons of mass destruction. Another way to look at the problem is sort of a different continuum. At one end of the continuum, down at the bottom, you have activities that are going on that are neither transparent or very cooperative. These are the sorts of things that a nation state will prepare to do in the event that they feel it's necessary to intervene on a particular matter. But as you move along that continuum, you start to see activities associated with treaties and negotiated agreements They're not completely transparent or completely cooperative because, of course, it is a negotiation. But there is a lot more partnership going on, a lot more cooperation in the kinds of things that are done. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you see the kinds of work we see more of today, at least in my organization. Truly cooperative and transparent programs to help bring scientists and engineers together from different countries to solve problems together. And that's where a lot of what happened after the Nuclear Security Summit process came into play with activities such as gift baskets. Now, the kinds of things that we are doing today span that spectrum, and if you kind of look at the two together, you can imagine a sort of a space to kind of consider some scenarios. Most of my remarks are going to be up in the upper left-hand corner where we've got cooperative programs focused on prevention. And so I think this is all going to be something that continues in the future because recently at the Carnegie Proliferation Summit, Dr. Ford, who's the special assistant to President Trump and senior director for WMD and counterproliferation at the NSC, indicated that he felt and that the administration felt that it is still very important to continue this quest for nuclear security and global securing of materials. He noted that we are now on this new team in the United States very committed to eliminating excess nuclear material, improving nuclear security, and preclude the possibility that terrorists could acquire a nuclear capability. He went on to say that we should be assured that they will remain actively engaged with international partners. That was something of a concern of ours, but that's a good sign that this partnership is going to continue and to do whatever is necessary to reduce risks. He also indicated a willingness to continue the longstanding U.S. policies of working to ensure developing countries are able to share in the benefits that nuclear technology can bring, as long as that sharing is done in a safe and secure manner, and that does not imperil our strong national security interests in preventing proliferation. So personally, I'm optimistic that the momentum that was generated during the Obama administration over the last 15 and other activities over the last 15 years will hopefully continue. One of the things I'm going to do here is give you a few examples of how we develop technology and where that technology ends up going. But to do that, I would like you to sort of think about how we engage. And up at the top here are sort of three ways we engage. First, it's about partnerships. Our organization at Sandia Labs in the last 2 years has worked with partners in roughly 95 different countries. We've worked with government organizations, non-government organizations, private foundations, everything from the Skoll Foundation to others, to try to help build a human capacity in these countries to be able to address these safety and security issues that they face. The second thing we do is around policy engagement. Please don't ask me any questions about policy because we do not do policy at the labs. I'll defer those to our other speakers. But what we do is try to help the policymakers understand first what's possible technically, what can science and technology bring to help a policy, and then secondly, if there is a policy, what are the impacts of that policy in terms of addressing threats and solving problems. So for those of you who are aspire to a role in the policy community, I encourage you to develop at least a working knowledge of some of the technologies associated with nuclear safety and security and safeguards. And if you're a scientist and engineer working on new ideas to prevent the misuse, I would encourage you to pay very close attention to what these government leaders and diplomats are saying and try to look for ways that your technology can address specifically what their needs are. I like to say that as scientists and engineers, when we work with folks in other countries, we tend to speak a common language. And that means we see problems sort of in a similar way. And so I think a lot of times we can solve and find solutions to those problems when diplomacy fails and people get caught up in language. So that's a good thing. I mentioned the partnerships. Those things are really important. And it's not just going into another place, sitting down, doing a project, and then leaving. One of the keys is to try to find a way to make those partnerships endure. if you ask me, I would love to see a little Sandia Thunderbird in every country of the world, and maybe if it's kind of like Coca-Cola, maybe that would bring peace and security to every place. The third thing I do need to mention, because I am an engineer, is the role we play in coming up with system solutions. It's not just about solving a point problem, but it's about thinking about the larger system and to try to come up with solutions that address that systematic view of what we're trying to address. So with that, I'm going to give you a few examples. I'm sorry this is a bit of our chart. I didn't know the room was going to be quite so long and narrow, but we kind of contribute in three different ways. We do a lot of studies, and then we develop some technology, and then we help build human capacity. For example, in terms of studies, we recently completed a study on Iridium-192. The NNSA was concerned about whether or not we had the right level of protection for some of these sources. We did some look at the impacts and protection levels, and as a result of our evaluation, the NNSA was able to justify raising the threshold for Iridium-182 sources to the same quantity used by the IAEA and the US NRC, thereby eliminating the need to pursue any additional engineering solutions to some of these to protect some of these sources. In terms of some of the technologies that we've developed, one is known as the EDAS, the Enhanced Data Authentication System. That's this little black box in the upper right-hand corner. That was sort of a concept we came up with to help improve the information that inspectors had that were going into nuclear facilities internationally. Usually they have to collect information on their own, and due to the arrangements they have with the facility, don't have access to a lot of facility operational information. Well, we came up with a way to be able to take the measurements being developed and collected by an operator who owns the instrumentation at a facility, to find a way to branch off some of that information and provide it to an inspector without really disclosing any sensitive or proprietary information owned by the facility. It's not as easy as it sounds, because you have to deal with authenticating the information, you have to deal with making sure there's firewalls and security around that information, and it has to be the information that the inspector can use and understand. All of that takes time and development. That was a NNSA supported program, but is now in the hands of the Euratom, the European Authority for Nuclear Material Safeguards. Euratom has, as a result, modified its standard data collection software to accommodate some of this new information they now have coming in through different data streams. Another technology that we've developed, and there's a point to this particular one, shown here in the lower right-hand corner. It's called the Remote Monitored Seal Array. This is another technology used in providing safeguards at nuclear facilities. It's sort of a fiber optic seal with sort of an architecture built around a secure sensor platform that can collect data, ensure that tampering hasn't occurred, and includes all the cryptography required, and then sends signals to safeguards experts. The point of this particular example was this was actually started in 2005 under a cooperative research and development activity sponsored by DOE with Canberra. It was demonstrated in 2007, finally prototyped and delivered to the IAEA in 2010, but it's only been recently that the IAEA has been able to authorize its use in safeguards agreements. And the point is, it takes a long time sometimes for some of this technology to go from the idea to being authorized for use, because there's a lot at stake in some of these technologies. I mean, you're now assuring a lot of people that what those devices are protecting is truly happening, and that there's nothing that can happen untoward and jeopardize our security. In the center is another device that is somewhat interesting. It's called MIRDIS. It's a mobile radiation detection and identification system. This is one of those engineering feats that required a whole lot of organizations to participate on together. In fact, this is another aspect of what we do is a lot in partnerships. It takes a lot of different kinds of expertise. That project was developed with not only with Sandia, but with Los Alamos National Labs, with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and several private contractors. It's basically a device that is used at ports, in this case at the port of Salalah in Oman. And what it can do is travel down rows of containers or have vehicles kind of pass through it as they're leaving and entering the facility to look for radiation signatures using some sodium iodide detector. And then there's some software that goes along with that to try to analyze the data and combine it with other measurements being made at the port, like X-rays and things of that nature. There are 4 units now operational there, and while it isn't foolproof, it is another piece of the bigger system on trying to detect the illicit trafficking of materials. I mentioned capacity building and partnerships. One project, Secretary Moniz, before he left, was able to help do a ribbon cutting. This was one of those gift baskets that came out of the Nuclear Security Summit process. China, which has one of the largest growing nuclear power industries, realized they needed to have their own human capacity to help operate and regulate their nuclear industry. So they built a facility. I think they spent $170 million on it. It's a center of excellence for physical security. The agreement was the U.S. and the Chinese partnered together to help design the kinds of things that were necessary in a center of excellence to ensure that the Chinese were putting in place very strong security systems at their nuclear facilities. It was an opportunity to, again, build a partnership with the Chinese. And in fact, subsequent now to its opening, we are looking for opportunities to do some joint research projects with them. And that's one of those things that is very important to us, continuing that relationship in a new mechanism. Finally, I just want to mention relationship with universities. In the lower right-hand corner, when the United Arab Emirates decided to begin building their nuclear industry, in fact, I think the first of their 4 1,500 megawatt reactors goes online this year. The question they asked was, we said, well, how are you going to regulate and operate this industry? They said, well, who do we hire? And our response was, well, no, it's a state responsibility to regulate its industries. You need to develop the capability to do that. They said, well, we don't have any capability. So Sandy Labs, Texas A&M University, and Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi came together to build a program called GENI, the Global Nuclear Energy Infrastructure Institute, to begin training the future of their regulatory and managing organizations in the UAE government. It's just been truly amazing to watch the development and the growth of their understanding and commitment to providing safety, security, and regulatory control over this industry. These 4 reactors are right on the Gulf. To paraphrase somebody else, you can see Iran out their back door, and so it's really important. But with that activity sort of reached its 5-year milestones, we're now moving on to some research projects with the university. I'm going to finish up here with my thoughts on the future, because it's a very dynamic future. We see a lot going on domestically. There are worries about the changes in administration and congressional priorities. We're worried about the degree of private sector participation or buy-in. And of course, the ability for us to be able to interact across various U.S. government agencies without a solid set of leaders in place always remains a little bit uncertain. Globally, we want to make sure that the international institutions remain strong, that there is commitment. With the end of the Nuclear Security Summit process, we want to make sure those institutions remain strong. Hopefully, cooperation will continue. And then we're always worried about accidents, terrorism, or other proliferation efforts. And then finally, technology, fortunately, does not stand still, or unfortunately in some cases, because now we have worries about threat capabilities. What can they do to us with unmanned aerial systems, with cyber? We have to be worrying about all that. We have to worry about tech surprise, advanced manufacturing capabilities that suddenly shorten the time for adversaries to be able to build a capability. Open source information, that's a good thing, but it also worries us because now people have access to information that they didn't have access to before. Some of it is fine, some of it worries us. And then finally, being able to maintain long-term sustainability of our science and technology programs. We have to continue to push science and technology forward and not weaken it. That's going to require a lot. It's going to require a lot from our government support. It's going to have to require a lot from our educational institutions because we have to improve physical security of our facilities and materials, we have to be able to integrate cybersecurity into things we've been doing for 60 years. We have to improve the safeguards to detect diversion, and we have to improve data analytics, a new field, and so on and so on. But I think in the end, if we're able to come together as a community and do this, I think nuclear security, global nuclear security will be remain healthy, at least in my lifetime. So with that, I wanted to go through quickly in case you had some questions. So thank you very much.
Dr. Wilson, thank you so much. We do have a bit of time for a few questions for Dr. Wilson's presentation. And please raise your hand if you have any questions, and then someone with a microphone will come to you. While people are mulling over, oh, wait, question? No. Mulling questions. I could ask you a question.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I should say, full disclosure is that I am an advisor for Rodney's program, so I want to make sure that that's clear. I'm saying that so that make sure that I have a bias, so pro bias, and I'm just been taken over struck by over the years that you've been able to your center, your staff, yourself, been able to bring together some contentious parties, for example, India and Pakistan. So could you tell us briefly, a story about how you've dealt with some of these challenges to bring together some of these adversaries or rivals and getting them to work together on a mutual security project?
Sure. We at Sandia, part of our Center for Global Security Cooperation is a piece of it called the Cooperative Monitoring Center that celebrated its 20th anniversary about 2 years ago now. It was created back in a day when there was a lot of tension in the Middle East, and one of our first projects was, if you know where the Allenby Bridge is on the border between Jordan and the West, they were having difficulty with people crossing that border. People did not want to have to show their faces for cultural reasons, religious reasons. You had different governments operating there, but a great concern about the trafficking of dangerous materials, in particular explosives. So for those of you old enough to remember what airports were like before 9/11, that's kind of how the border was. A lot of people worrying about people crossing, and we brought in some technology. Some of the first explosive portals were installed at that border with some other technologies. And by the end of our effort, we were able to get the Palestinian Authority, the Israeli government, and the Jordanian government all to agree that with this technology, they could be confident that people could cross that border without any cultural tensions flaring up, and be confident that no explosives or other dangerous materials were being transported. And that kind of got us in this idea, hey, we can solve some really tough diplomatic problems with technology, and that kind of blossomed. And more recently, we've had folks from India and Pakistan come together, particularly young people, to try to talk about how to do confidence building through the use of technology. In particular, when it comes to, while the nuclear piece might be a tough nut to crack, at least when it comes to missile transparency, we're able to bring some of these folks together and start talking about how they might monitor and come to an agreement on sort of getting rid of some of the missiles that are everywhere in South Asia. So we continue to look for these opportunities to bring people together. Sometimes we get a visiting scholar for a few days. We've actually had folks spend an entire year at Sandia Labs to try to work with our science and engineers on finding ways to address some of their policy issues. So that's a long answer to your question. Sorry.
No, Rodney, that's great. I said earlier, you could spend at least half a day telling these stories. I think the stories, to me, are some of the greatest aspects to really illustrate your work. Scanning audience, see if there are any questions or comments. If not, Jennifer McAfee, yes.
Hi, thank you very much, Rodney. I was just curious, I guess the third example you showed about the truck passing through, or the cargo container passing through. So is that just in a development stage?
No, that is deployed. There are 4 units now operating at that port. Every port's a little different, and so in some ports we have sort of fixed portals that they just pass through. In other places, in this particular port in Salal, which is right on the coast of Oman, the big ships coming from Asia stop there, offload their containers, and put them back on smaller ships that can fit through the Suez Canal. And so it's a very important port from that standpoint. So they take the opportunity to kind of do quick scans of some of these containers. We have to be very sensitive. There's always lots of interesting constraints, one of which is a business constraint. You go to some of these ports and it's kind of like, well, we've got this great idea, and if you can just park that container over there for about an hour, and they look at you and go, no, we're not stopping for 1 second. You can do what you want, but this is every second is money to a lot of shipping concerns these days. So we really have to be sensitive to a lot of unusual factors.
I know. I was just curious because I worked on a container security project some years ago, and they were trying to find this kind of solution, but less than 2% of the containers were actually inspected, and it was this just-in-time arrival kind of situation where time means money. So I wondered, do you have, I assume, proposals to deploy these things around the world, because it's
so the U.S. government, of course, is working with those countries where the risk is the greatest. Do you have a lot of materials passing through that country? Do you have a high level of technology? Do you have the presence of adversaries and terrorist groups and non-state actors? When you get those three things kind of together in a soup, you got a dangerous situation. We may not be worrying about the port in the Virgin Islands. I don't know. I mean, the idea would be eventually, let's check every container. But we start with those areas where we have the greatest concern that there may be nuclear materials or radiological materials being transported. Singapore is another area where there's a lot of transportation going on. It's also happening very fast, very quick, at a high volume. And so sometimes there's technical challenges we haven't quite addressed yet, but we keep trying to find ways to do that. I mean, people didn't think we could check every bag going on an airplane until 9/11 came along, and then boom, we check every bag going on an airplane. That's our same goal here with containers: is can we check every container being transported? There's 500,000 containers a day getting in and out of the U.S., so it's a tough problem. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Milton Honig, please.
Hi, Milton Honig. Along the same line, you described 2 other devices for collecting data. Are they deployed, say, by IAEA inspectors, or?
Yes. So the safeguards agreements between the IAEA and various countries are usually confidential. We don't always know exactly what those arrangements involve or what technologies involved, but they are now both approved by the IAEA, and they will be used as they're appropriately be used. And so, both of those technologies, and we keep looking for new technologies. We look for interesting materials that we could coat facilities with that would bleed or otherwise create a scar if you tried to penetrate them. There's a lot of interesting materials problems for the community to deal with. It's not just electronics. And then you have to put it all in a system. So, sorry, you're right. I could go.
Oh yeah, Rodney, thank you so much. And I think you'll be here at the end. And if anyone has brilliant ideas for cooperative projects for his center, please come up, and I think he'd be happy to partner with you. Remember, it's all about partnerships. Exactly. Please join me in thanking Dr. Wilson for his remarks.
Thank you.
Great start. Yeah, so Rodney got us off to a terrific start. Next, it's a pleasure to introduce Dick Meserve, Dr. Richard Meserve, who has done so many great things over his career. 5 years ago, not to say it's the end of his career, but about 5 years ago, FAS honored Dick for his lifetime achievement. Obviously, he's still living, still working, still doing important work. He got the first ever Richard L. Garwin Achievement Award, and actually, we gave it to him when he was president of the Carnegie Institution for Science, and he's still emeritus president of that institution. And he is going to talk today about the work that he and others have done going to Japan many, many times over the last now 6 years after the Fukushima accident. And even before then, Dick's been engaged in nuclear safety. Those of you know his work, he was the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. He has his PhD in applied physics. And he also has a JD degree as well. So he's a lawyer physicist by training, and it's a great combination for the intersection work he does in the technical and policy arenas in nuclear safety issues. It's a great pleasure to have Dick here to talk about the work he's been doing post-Fukushima accident. Come on up.
Thank you, Charles. I'm really pleased to be here. One of the unfortunate realities of the nuclear business is that accidents do occur, but when they do occur, there is a great opportunity to learn from them. Of course, there have been three major accidents: the 3 Mile Island accident, the Chernobyl accident, and of course the Fukushima accident. And there's a lot that's been learned as a result of the Fukushima accident, which has affected how nuclear businesses run all over the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit today at Charles' request about some of the safety implications for what happened at Fukushima. I think all of you were very familiar with the event. On March 11th, there was a huge earthquake off the coast of Japan with the result of a tsunami that then hit the coastline of Japan with horrendous impacts. You see that a huge number of people were killed or missing. I think the most recent numbers are closer to 20,000 have been killed because many of the missing, it turned out, were never found. And a huge devastation, as you can see, all along the coast. It had particular implications for the Fukushima Daiichi plant. This is a picture before the tsunami. When the earthquake hit, of course, it was immediately detected at the plant. There are automatic systems that shut down the nuclear reactions in those reactors that were operating. The earthquake was at or above the design basis for the plant. Everything actually was working as had been intended. There was actually no serious damage to the plants. The safety systems were operating. The reactor turned off. The emergency diesels provide power, turned on. And of course, you need continuing power to keep the fuel still, even though the reaction has been turned off with the insertion of control rods. There's still a huge amount of heat that's coming out of the reactor fuel. And so they need to be cooled for an extended period of time to prevent the fuel from melting down. Well, 45 minutes later, the tsunami hit, and this is just a shot of the wave that is cascading itself through the plant. It was a 15-meter tsunami that hit the plant. There was a seawall to protect from tsunamis that was in place, but unfortunately it was only 7 meters tall. So you had a huge wave that was devastating the plants. Plants had an unfortunate design in that they were not designed to accommodate a tsunami that exceeded the seawall. The emergency diesels were all below grade, and all of the electrical switchgear was below grade, and none of it was behind watertight doors. So when the tsunami hit, they went into a situation that's called station blackout. Obviously, as a result of the earthquake, all the transmission lines were down, so they lost off-site power. And so they were dependent on the emergency diesels. And then, of course, once the diesels were flooded, switchgears flooded, they lost all the power into the plants. And unfortunately, some of the instrumentation, monitoring equipment can be run by batteries. Batteries were also below grade. So they were in a station blackout situation where the capacity to drive most of the pumps. There were some emergency pumps that actually did turn on that run by steam, but basically the monitoring systems were gone. Capacity to use the motor-driven valves and so forth were gone. So they were in an absolutely desperate situation there as a result of this terrible event. This is just a shot this is one of the reactor buildings. It was an intact building. I showed you, obviously, in the earlier slide. After a couple of days, there was the steam-driven cooling pumps actually ran much longer than they had been projected to run. Hydrogen built up within the containments of the reactors. There's an interaction with steam and the zirconium in the fuel that liberates hydrogen. And so you had this destruction of the reactors. And of course, with the emissions of radioactive materials that occur. There's a lot of, in these particular styles, these were boiling water reactors. The spent fuel pools were up high. And there was concern that the spent fuel pools may have drained as a result, with the possibility that there's zirconium fires could have started in those spent fuel pools and then released a huge inventory of radioactive materials into an air pathway. So it was a devastating accident, as all of you know, and has had huge implications. I actually visited a couple of times. I'm the tall guy in the back. And touring the facility, there were some parts of the facility, obviously, we could not go. Obviously did not go into any of the reactor buildings. They sent robots in, and in fact, some of the electronics in the robots got fried, and they were unable to get them out. But even just sort of wandering around areas where you're shielded, we were obviously fully dressed out at that time. This has devastating impact on Japan. They have 56 operating nuclear power plants that were before the accident. It provided about 30% of their power. Some of the plants were allowed to continue to operate for a while, and then as they went down for refueling, they basically were not allowed to start up again. So they went down to 0 operating nuclear reactors. And this has huge consequences for Japan. As I mentioned, 30% of the power had come from nuclear reactors. Japan has no indigenous energy resources, so it's highly dependent on alternative fuels. There's limited renewables and opportunities for renewables in Japan. So they're dependent on fuel resources that come in from other countries. Nuclear power is the cheapest power in Japan. And one of the challenges is that a lot of their fuel comes from the Middle East and then goes through contested the South China Sea to be able to get to Japan. So there's a national security and an economic security issue for Japan, possible vulnerability to supply interruptions. It's a great interest in Japan to try to sort out what went wrong, how to fix it, and if they can operate the plant safely to get the plants restarted. As you might expect, there is huge public concern about nuclear power in Japan. So the general public you would fully anticipate, is not very enthusiastic about some of these plants restarting. But from an economic and national security perspective, it's huge interest in the government in getting them restarted if they can. But they shouldn't do it if they can't assure that their meet or exceed current international standards for safety. And they're pledged that they will do that. I'm going to talk about some of the responses to it. We have limited time, so I'm going to not focus on a lot of the technical issues, but one of the really biggest challenges that I think the nuclear industry confronts has to do with external events. These are events that challenge the safety of the plants that arise outside the plants. We're talking about floods, hurricanes, typhoons, tsunamis, earthquakes, all those sorts of things that can challenge the facility. Now, of course, you can have internal events that also occur at plants. Those are caused by human error, caused by failures of equipment. But we actually have very good data on equipment reliability. And there's a lot of information about how humans make mistakes, and a lot of work has been done on understanding those mistakes and through training and simplified systems and redundancy, finding ways to protect against them. And every nuclear plant is designed in a way so there's something called defense in depth, so that every active system has a backup to be able to assure the performance of the safety function if one of the other layers of the safety system is to fail. So for internal events, there's very well thought through, there's elaborate things called probabilistic risk assessments, where they look at all of the parameters that can affect the pathways to accidents and be able to defend against it. Understood very well. External events are a challenge. First of all, it's very hard to estimate. What is the magnitude at a, say, 10 to the minus 4 probability of an external event? The data may not have historical data that is adequate, and almost always you don't have historical data that's adequate to give you that information. There may be very imperfect physical models to be able to model a system, to be able to assess them. And of course, with climate change, we're in a very different world with regard to the possibility of floods, extreme weather events of all kinds, the intensity of those weather events, so that events that the historical record may say you'd be comfortable with, you shouldn't be comfortable with as we go on into the future. So, and the other problem with external events is that given their nature, you can't really design systems with this defense in depth possibility. You can have an event that occurs that takes out all the layers, which of course is exactly what happened at Fukushima. So external events are a huge challenge, and I think that for modern reactor designs, the biggest risk pathway to an accident is from an external event. But the internal events are very well captured and analyzed, and the risks are actually largely arise from external events, and it's hard to do existing plants. It's very hard you can't move a plant up if there's a flooding risk. You've got to find ways to deal with it. And that, in the case of the Japanese reactors, means huge seawalls that are being built around some of the reactors, efforts to have additional power supplies that are up high, mobile equipment of various kinds, watertight doors to protect things. They've tried a variety of ways to try to bootstrap their way around to give them a capacity to respond to events with this huge uncertainty about what exactly mechanism for failure would be. But that has resulted, there's huge efforts underway in Japan to get some, not all, of those older plants running again. They have spent on the order of $1 billion a unit on upgrades of some of these plants to try to accommodate the challenge. Some of them actually is astonishing. I visited a large number of these plants. The seawalls, 30-meter high seawalls that extend for a mile around the plant to try to protect from tsunamis. So, a huge effort that has been underway to build systems and engineering solutions to try to solve the problem. Difficulty is that actually spending money to deal with the problems is the easy part of the challenge. There are a lot of soft lessons that need to be learned, relearned, that were problems in Japan. One is just a very fundamental one, that the operator has the prime responsibility for safety. Regulatory compliance isn't enough. Regulatory appliance is not actually sufficient to assure safety. The operator knows what's going on. Operator has to take charge. And it's absolutely fundamental principle of nuclear safety is that the operator has to clearly see. That is something that it has to accomplish. And that was a problem. It was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, shuffling of responsibility that was going back and forth between the government and the operators to who was in charge. The other thing was the need for a competent, well-financed, independent regulator. Regulator at the time of the Fukushima accident was a part of METI, Ministry for Economic Trade and Industry, which was sort of like our Commerce Department. Very much and closely allied with the industry that it was intended to regulate. With the consequence that the regulator was not truly aggressive in pursuing safety issues, particularly if they were impose additional costs. So that is something that has been remedied in that they have created a new regulator which aspires to have the toughest regulations in the world, and they're well on their way to achieving that. The other problem in Japan was, and this maybe have a cultural element to it, is that they asserted to the public that the plants were absolutely safe. Nothing could ever happen. And perhaps some of the operators even started to believe it. And of course, nothing in life has 100% safety capability. Bad things can always happen. And you need to be prepared to think about, acknowledge risk, evaluate it, think about it, always have an open mind to the possibility that bad things can happen, and prepare the what-if scenarios and sort through them. And that really relates to the last point, to something that was missing in Japan, which is struggling, and this is a really difficult thing to do, was to establish a culture in which everyone in the plant understands that their primary responsibility is the safety of the plant. What that means is that if you see something that causes you concern from a safety perspective, it is your obligation to step forward and to make sure it is addressed. If your immediate supervisor doesn't respond when you raise this issue, you go above the immediate supervisor and you raise the issue to a higher level. And I should say at the NRC, some of those severe sanctions that are imposed on licensees are when there's retaliation against an employee that raises a safety concern. But that's absolutely forbidden. And in Japan, the culture was much more that you maintain solidarity with your group. A number of issues had arisen with regard to protecting your supervisor when safety checks weren't done. People would just lie about them. So you have a whole different culture you need to put into the middle of this operation, and this is a big challenge for them, which they recognize. They've been able to do it in the auto industry. The auto industry, the Japanese taught the world how to build cars that were close to defect-free. And that's because if somebody's on a line, saw a defect in a car, he pulled the chain and they stopped the line and they fixed it and found out where it happened. And that was something where that was an immediate acknowledgement of a problem, and that your culture was that you fixed it, dealt with it. We've got to do something similar in the nuclear industry, and it needs big change. Wait a minute, this is a quick summary of what's happened in Japan. There were similar implications all over the world, that a lot of changes have been made in countries all over the world with regard to lessons from Fukushima, external events or some, dealing with beyond design basis events or another. But this fundamental aspect of safety culture is a recurring theme in the discussion. So thank you very much. So a lightning race with difficult topics.
Thank you. Just checking the time. Yeah, we're good. We're very much on schedule. I think one of our speakers, John Holdren, has his hand up for a question. So, but while we're getting the mic, John, you have a question for Dick?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, yeah. Oh, let's wait for the microphone, please, Pia. Well, we're waiting for the microphone, and I want to mention that you notice that Dick Meserve is not shy, and he speaks truth to power, and it can be difficult when you're speaking across cultures. Last year, Dick was honored by the Japanese government with one of the highest honors, I think the highest honor to a non-Japanese citizen. I was there at the ceremony. It was very moving. The Japanese ambassador's residence last fall, and highly deserving of the award. And I think the Japanese officials and others are really taking on board his advice. John, please.
Yeah, Dick, when I visited the Fukushima Daiichi plant a few months after the accident, I was also taken to a plant about 10 kilometers away, the Fukushima Daini plant, which suffered a tsunami of about the same size, of course an earthquake of about the same size, and lost none of its reactors. And I'm sure you've looked at that, and I just wondered if you'd comment on the lessons from the comparison. How come Fukushima Daiichi did so badly and Fukushima Daini did so well in the face of a comparable set of stresses?
There is the sister plant. Is Daini and Daiichi is 1 and 2 are near each other, and they had a comparable tsunami. There was one huge technical difference between the two plants, and as it happened, the Daini units had a emergency generator, which was a gas air-cooled diesel generator that was up high. So they had emergency power. Now they also, as a cultural thing, they had a superb chief nuclear officer who recognized what needed to go on, and they did heroic things to get the power from the one operating emergency diesel generator to the units so they could restore the cooling operation of the fuel. So it was a combination of the fortuity that they had actually a more forgiving design with emergency power available that was not available at the Daiichi plant, and also a really exceptional leader who was fully prepared to deal with the situation and did so aggressively. And it has resulted in an entirely different outcome at the two units.
On my list, I have Ambassador Tom Graham, and then Chris Bidwell and Mary Daniels. Ambassador Graham.
Thank you for that talk. It was very, very good. And you've mostly already answered my question. My understanding is that at Daiichi, the emergency power was located in the basement, which meant it would be the first to go if there was a flood. If there had just been a focus on the protection of backup diesel power, they would have had the same result as the sister plant. Isn't that so?
You're right. I think the fundamental problem they had was they had lost all of their emergency power and had no ready way to restore it. Now, they did some really quite aggressive things. They lost their batteries, too. The workers were out in the parking lots pulling automobile batteries, setting them up in series to get the required voltage to be able to run the monitoring equipment and so forth. And so they were using fire trucks, and they were late in getting seawater injected. They were trying to find other ways to cool the fuel, but they were in an absolutely desperate condition, and the odds were very much against them from the very beginning because of the failure to think through the consequences if the seawall was breached.
Chris Bidwell.
Yes, thank you for a great talk, Dick. My question goes to property damage and compensation for victims. How was that worked out cost-wise? Was it covered privately or covered through the government? Who paid for the damage? Who paid for the remediation, which I suspect was a pretty heavy bill?
This is for Daiichi.
Yes, for Daiichi.
Well, this is as a formal matter, the responsibility still rests with TEPCO. TEPCO, by any American evaluation, would be seen as a bankrupt operation as a result of the huge exposure for the plant. They've been allowed to float 1,000-year bonds as a way to bring in cash. There are various mechanisms that Japan can do that would not be allowed here that provide the capacity to be able to do the necessary work. Ultimately, there's going to be a huge, one way or another, is government resources are going to be necessary to respond to the accident.
Mary Daniels.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Meserve. It's good to see you. On the issue of centrality of safety culture that you raised, I was wondering if you can draw any comparisons or contrasts with the Challenger issue, specifically what features are sort of omnibus in making centrality, because in the Challenger there was a kind of a comfort, there was not that much questioning, and I'm wondering whether you can draw any salient comparisons.
I'm actually not aware of those kinds of cross comparisons with the Challenger accident, with the Fukushima accident. I guess I would say that there was both evidence and complacency that arose from the fact that, well, nothing bad's happened yet. And therefore we should have some comfort that we're okay on into the future. And clearly a failure in both instances to go through the what-if scenarios to acknowledge the possibilities of things actually could go wrong and what would be the consequences. Engineering issues were obviously quite different.
We have two final questions for Dr. Meserve, Jan Lodel and Rodney Wilson. Jan.
As we think about the potential role of nuclear energy in dealing with global warming, there's all these new designs, inherently safe, et cetera. What did you learn about those new designs? Do they inherently, if you will, reduce a lot of these problems at less cost and so forth?
Well, let me say that obviously everyone learns from an accident. So the exact scenario for Fukushima is one everyone will think about, and fundamentally you think about it as siting the plant. In the case of Fukushima Daiichi accident, actually the plant, the natural ground level was about 30 meters above the sea, and they brought it down to 20 to save energy on the pumping seawater in for cooling. And they had an unrealistic assessment of what the tsunami vulnerability was. It turns out that there were some internal documents in TEPCO that indicated that it was vulnerable to a 15-meter tsunami long after it had been built. They were worried more about the seismic side than they were about the tsunami. So I think that accident is highly unlikely to occur for the same reasons. For existing plants, obviously you now need to worry about those plants that are vulnerable everywhere, and particularly now with climate change, the flooding risks are changing in ways that require, obviously a plant needs to be near cooling water. And so there is a flooding challenge that needs to be addressed. It's something the NRC has been doing in the U.S. and is something that will have to occur. I think that the modern designs have even stronger defenses against internal events. The challenge of external events remains and could become greater for the reasons that I say. And again, I think that principally you address that through robustness of structures from hurricanes and tornadoes, and siting to deal with tsunami, flooding type risks, earthquake risks. I mean, in some places you probably shouldn't just build plants because of earthquake risk, and that actually is a big problem for Japan. I mean, given the locale and the vulnerability of Japan for earthquakes. So they're spending a lot of time as they restart plants and thinking about restart plants to reevaluate the earthquake vulnerability.
Rodney, please.
Yeah, I hope this doesn't take too long. You mentioned earlier on the difficulty in assessing safety when you're dealing with rare events. And I know a science around expert elicitation has grown over the years, and the NRC has relied heavily on it to be able to come up with good estimates. It seems like nowadays, as I read the newspapers, I'm not sure, there's a concern of who do you believe? Is there a concern now of how we're going to assess some of the, how we are going to rely on expert elicitation, particularly in the, as you mentioned, the uncertainty now of what events might occur out there?
Well, as part of the regulatory process, expert elicitation is now widely used, seismic risk in particular now, at U.S. plants. I'm not aware that the public is particularly attuned to that, how that internal evaluation is taking place. But we clearly do live at a time when the comfort that people have with expertise of all kinds has greatly diminished, and willingness of people to just believe that, okay, here's an expert says this is safe, and whether people would be willing to accept that is something that I think we're seeing in many areas is subject to challenge. I think that's a much bigger problem than nuclear power, incidentally. It's a problem on how science forms the basis for decisions of all kinds. It's a particular kind of expertise that you need to rely on to be able to make decisions, and if people can just make up their own facts on scientific issues, then we have a big, big problem.
Yeah, well, if we have time at the very end, we get more questions for Dick and for Rodney, but at this point, please join me in giving a hearty thank you to Dr. Meserve. Wow. Yeah, I just heard John Holdren say, great talk. Exactly. I was just going to say, a great talk. We have two great speakers giving two great talks to start this off. Ask our graduate students to come on up to the table, and Frankie's in the process of teeing up the first presentation. I believe we're going alphabetical order, right, Frankie? Or yeah. Okay, that sounds good. So Stephen first, and then we'll go Hannah, Gardiner, and then Ady as cleanup, but last but not least. So as I said at the introductory remarks, this is the first time we've done an event where we're crossing the generations, and it's terrific. You know, FAS looks like, it is a bridging organization cultivating the next generation of engineers and scientists, especially in fields of nuclear safety and security. And we have three terrific role models here today, and you've already heard from two of them. Looks like Stephen Dahunsi's PowerPoint's keyed up to stay on time. You can read his biography, but you'll note that this is an international event too. We do have two speakers from outside the United States originally. Stephen is from Nigeria and now studying at the University of Tennessee. Also does a lot of work at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And so it's a great pleasure to have him speak in front of you today. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson, and the Federation of American Scientists for having me here. I would briefly talk about myself and what I do now, and I'll be ready to take questions regarding my presentation of what I do back at the Oak Ridge National Lab. I intend to talk just briefly about Nigeria, my past research, present, and then I'll briefly conclude on things which I formed as opinion from what I've been doing and what I'm presently doing. I'm from Nigeria, and Nigeria is from West Africa, about 181 million citizens, rich in history, over 250 ethnic groups. Nigeria has over 520 different languages, and we have accepted English as our official language. Compared to the United States, Nigeria is like 1/10 the size of the United States, and actually, in terms of population, we're about half the size of population of the United States. Why are we interested in nuclear technology in Nigeria? We have a gamma irradiation facility that which is used for food irradiation that has a cobalt-60 source, about 340 kilocuries as at 2005, and as at 2014 depleted to about 150, and then all other associated labs, dosimetry, and sterile insect technique and other processes. Secondly, Nigeria has 1.7 MV tandem accelerator, gamma specs, thermal hydraulics lab in one of the universities back in Nigeria. The third one is a research reactor, which was commissioned in 2004 and is a 31 kilowatt research reactor, uses HEU as well, up to 90% enrichment with IAEA safeguards. Presently, the conversion studies is ongoing, and the conversion study started in 2006 with efforts from the IAEA and the United States to convert from HEU to LEU. And also, ultimately, Nigeria has an ongoing effort to generate electricity from a nuclear plant. My past research, I graduated from the Abubakar Tafawa Balewa University in Bauchi, the BEng Electrical Electronics Engineering, also University of Ghana, to kind of bridge between my electrical engineering experience and going into the nuclear industry. I presently work for the Nigeria Atomic Energy Commission back in Nigeria. And also in this past year, I came to the University of Tennessee and I had my MS in nuclear and radiological engineering, and my area of research during my master's is nuclear security and learning how to, Nigeria as a newcomer country, coming here to learn how to integrate technology with a very good policy, like trying to enhance nuclear technology in Nigeria. What I did as part of my master's project is actually under consideration to extend that to other newcomer countries in the nuclear industry. I kind of want to talk about this just briefly for just brief information. This was actually part of my master's research. I actually conducted a research between those working in the nuclear industry and then try to compare that with United States, like asking a question, do you agree that a credible nuclear and radiological threat exists? The results actually shows that both Nigeria and the United States agree that the professionals from the HRP side, that is human reliability side of the industry, both in Nigeria believe that yes, there is a credible threat. But in terms of the Nigerian experience, the Nigerian graph is like higher, and looking at the symmetry is falling like towards like everybody agreeing to that factor. Also, how likely is this threat? Again, this histogram also shows that in Nigeria, everybody believes that the threat is high. I am not too sure if any of us have not heard about Boko Haram in Nigeria. They actually tag named the West African ISIS. They are as brutal and wicked as ISIS and operating very close to the institution that housed this research reactor. So that is probably one of the reasons why this is so high, and everybody believes, yes, this threat is very, very likely. Moving forward, presently this is what I do. The research reactor which uses HEU is in the process of being converted to an LEU fuel. So I'm kind of trying to work with my professor, Howard Hall at the University of Tennessee, and my mentor at the Oak Ridge National Lab, Jeff Chapman, who has helped in converting the Safari reactor in South Africa from HEU to LEU fuel. Now trying to help determine through coding, determination of source terms for the Nigerian Research Reactor 1, HEU and proposed LEU cost, and then to help evaluate the safeguards implication for storage and transportation. In doing my work, both my master's and the present work that I do, some things that I found very, very challenging, but very, very also that is important. When we talk about the challenges in the nuclear industry, funding is one of that. We have newcomer countries trying to go into this technology, but the funding is actually the challenge. One, most of these countries don't even have this well without, just like the UAE in their country. So there is need, just for example, myself coming from Nigeria and coming to gain the experience here. And then the cultural difference. In most times, from what I've gathered and the literatures I've gone through, we found out that the cultural difference between developing and developed country is very, very wide. And these are not the things that we can just Google and see to see what are the cultures in Nigeria versus what are the cultures in the United States. There is actually the need to have either somebody that is grounded or staying in that country or a citizen from that country that is present here in the US to actually know what are the difference. How do we implement this technology in this newcomer country versus the way we have implemented that in the United States. Also, looking at the international challenges, like global electricity demand is like calling for the use of nuclear technology. And of course, from my survey, credible nuclear security threat that exists. And they need to create safety, security, and safeguards analysis using modern technologies. Like technologies have evolved from what it used to be when in the 1950s, when the US started developing the nuclear program versus latest technology that is existing now. And there is actually need to like share that all around the world. In my conclusion, I would want to say priorities should be given to well spelled out proposal call that gives specific or specificity on different researches, which would accommodate internationals, like considering what is happening in other countries. It is the prerogative of like host countries to make sure they fund projects, but also we know and we are very clear on that a nuclear security threat or a nuclear threat in Nigeria is also a nuclear threat in United States and any part of the world. Also, funding that improves stronger partnership between U.S. and developing countries should be made a priority, and cross-cutting project development, collaboration that encourages human capital development, which involves young professionals present in the U.S. and to foster a longer partnership. And thank you. I look forward to questions.
Stephen, thank you very much. We're going to hold off on Q&A and have, and Frankie's queuing up Hannah Gardiner's talk. We'll hear from her, and then Ady, and then we'll do Q&A for all three students at the end. So is Hannah's coming up. Like I said, it's a great pleasure. I woke up early this morning and saw an email from her saying, I'm delayed, but she got here on time. That's great. And I know that she's also looking forward to the march tomorrow as well. One reason she's come here, and it was very flattering. She emailed me and she said, well, but here at your summit, we're looking forward to that. And I said, well, yes, because I'm glad to hear that, and it's a great professional opportunity to speak in front of this audience and also the webcast as well. So this is an opportunity not just to reach the few dozen people here in this audience right now, but we're able to reach potentially thousands or even potentially even millions across the country and the world. We're going to have this on our YouTube channel, and Frankie, as we'll be sending out after the event, the link to the recording, and we'll also be sending out to various universities as well. So without further ado, Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson, and thank you for inviting me to this. I am very excited about this, and when my flights were delayed, I was in panic mode. But anyway, I made it here just in time, so I'm very happy for that. So my presentation's decently short, so I'm going to just tell you where I start off. I'm born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so I didn't have much of a choice but to go to LSU for undergrad. I didn't know what I wanted to major in, so I thought that physics was a good idea. Well, decently early on, about halfway through my freshman year of my undergraduate studies, I thought that joining a research group was a really good idea. And at least at LSU in the physics department there, they do encourage undergraduates, even at the freshman level, to join a research group. Just do what you can, get involved, and start learning off the bat. And so after a conversation with a graduate student in one of the sort of common areas we have in our building, a girl named Laura Linhart, she told me she was a graduate student in this one research group, a nuclear physics research group, and she was talking to me, and she's like, hey, I think you should join this. And I had no idea what that meant. So I was like, okay, why not? So that's when I started working in 2011 for Dr. Jeff Blackman, and about a year later, Dr. Catherine Deibel, when she joined the LSU physics faculty. And as I mentioned, it was a nuclear physics lab, specifically doing research with nuclear astrophysics, which is a little bit different than what I currently do now. But that was my foray into this. And at the end of the day, I was kind of a detector scientist. We built radiation detectors for these nuclear astrophysics studies. A quick aside, in summer 2012, I did a research experience for undergraduates in REU at Indiana University under Dr. Mike Snow. This time, instead of doing nuclear astrophysics studies, I was building radiation detectors for a neutron spin rotation project, which is a little bit basic physics sort of studies, and that was a lot of fun. So coming out of undergraduate, I had a lot of experience with detectors and not quite sure what I wanted to do, if I wanted to go to grad school, or if any of this was right for me. That all changed in summer 2013. So this was the summer before my senior year of undergraduate studies. And Dr. Catherine Deibel, who I mentioned earlier, was going to the nuclear physics fly-in day. That was, I believe, early May of that year. And she asked me to go, and I said, okay, why not? This sounds like a good idea. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know if this 20-year-old undergraduate can do anything, but sure. And sure enough, I went, and it was just a full day. We woke up bright and early in the morning. We had this breakfast, and we learned all about how do you speak to your representatives. And then we spent the second half of the day that afternoon actually speaking to our representatives and trying to convince them, hey, you should fund nuclear science. It's kind of important. not just to everybody, but to the next generation like myself. And that was really eye-opening. It was really fascinating. And most importantly, I found it a lot of fun. And it's an opportunity that I don't think a lot of scientists really get to have. So I'm very lucky in that sense. And then later that summer in July, I went to the Radiation Detection for Nuclear Security Summer School hosted out at Pacific Northwest National Lab. Again, this was another opportunity that Dr. Blackman had mentioned to me, and he was like, hey, you should do this. I'll send you out there. And I'm like, I don't know anything about national security or nuclear national security, but okay. And that was about 2 weeks in July, and it changed my life. That was the point where I realized this is a lot of fun, because I didn't know if I wanted to stay in nuclear astrophysics or even go to grad school. But this kind of opened my eyes to say, like, hey, I can take all this science I know about radiation detectors that I've used and apply it to something a little bit more, I guess, tangible in this sense, something that could have a sort of impact. And it was those 2 weeks that really changed my mind on a lot of things. And I will say it's about 50% lectures, 50% hands-on activities. And this is a list of just some of the things we talked about. But one of the most important things I think that came out of that is that it is co-hosted by Dr. Jim Bocek, who would later become my PhD advisor and currently is right now. So I was one of 2 undergraduates at this summer school this year, and one of them was already at the University of Florida. So when Dr. Bocek had seen me, he was like, hey, you should consider nuclear engineering graduate school instead of physics graduate school. And needless to say, he was very, very convincing, and here I am now. So on to University of Florida. So as I mentioned, I'm in the PhD program for nuclear engineering under Jim Bocek. I did receive my master's about this time last year. I've worked on a couple of different projects. I like to think I've put a lot of different thumbs in a lot of different puddings. But the ones that are a little bit more national security oriented, I've done verification of minimum detectable activity for radiological threat source search. And that basically means that if there's a very, very tiny source, or say we're very, very far away from some sort of radiation source, how can we detect it and know for sure, oh, that is uranium, or that is cesium, or that is, pick your favorite isotope. Moving on, I did an atmospheric argon plume tracking of the University of Training reactor, and that was a lot of fun because I got to sit on top of our nuclear reactor on a paved roof in June in Florida. But no, it was a really great opportunity. It was a lot of fun, and I actually got to sit out there with my detector and sort of in real time watch the argon 41 levels coming out of our reactor, which is very interesting. And it also required that I take background measurements of campus. That's what this top picture is right here. I actually got to throw the same detector in my car and just drive it around campus, and that was my job one afternoon. And I got these really pretty plots out of it, and I actually have a couple more like that. That's the only one that I have here, but I have more pictures if anybody's interested. You can come find me after. And finally, I worked on a project, measurements and comparison of high-energy neutron spectra for helium-4 gas neutron detector for DT fusion research. And basically what that means is we were developing a new sort of neutron detector specifically for fast neutrons, which is something that's a little bit more difficult to detect. And that sort of research, I specifically wrote a paper on for using this for DT fusion research. However, this has also been shown to be applicable for used fuel casks monitoring. So that has some sort of national security interest. And finally, I'm actually just about to start my project, which I believe will be end up being my dissertation, doing, it's called the Rays for Roots project, which is X-ray backscatter radiography of root systems to see which sort of types of grass are best for biofuel. So that's actually pretty interesting. And sort of X-ray backscatter radiography has also been used in applications for detecting landmines. Neutron backscatter, like I said, has been used for detecting potentially bad nuclear material, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of, I guess, applications, not just in national security, but also in industry too. And that's something that I think is really interesting because you can kind of sell it on both sides of that spectrum. And finally, as far as coursework relevant to national security, as I mentioned, I did that radiation detection for national security summer school. And because it's co-hosted by my advisor, Dr. Bocek, we tend to send a lot of Florida students to that, and it is a lot of fun. I also had spent a summer out at Pacific Northwest National Lab after I had moved here, and I was able to attend the Next Generation Safeguards Initiative summer school, which was about a week, a lot of similar sort of things, and it was kind of an introduction to how the IAEA works from a safeguards perspective. And that was also very interesting, very eye-opening, and kind of reinforced this is something I'm very interested in. And finally, at the University of Florida, we do have courses on nuclear nonproliferation and safeguards, actually a couple classes on safeguards, of which I've taken the graduate coursework. And we also have other courses we're trying to work with other departments like the political science department, trying to see if in the law school and see if maybe we could have some sort of, international law, international relations, international security sort of classes that could be a little bit more open to more scientifically minded people. And I've actually gone and sat down and spoken with the poli-sci department. I'm like, hey, I'm interested in this sort of stuff. And they're like, what? So, I think there could be a lot more done to help sort of have this cross-disciplinary research in a way, but not within STEM, but outside of STEM too. And so that's all. Thank you.
Hannah, thank you so much. Well, Frankie is queuing up Ady's presentation. I'll just quick recap. I think these two speakers have already shown the value of relationships, and Rodney Wilson's one of his main themes, partnerships. It always comes back to developing those relationships, partnerships, those networks, and both of them brought up the question of funding and resources, making sure that we have the human and technological equipment resources available in this country and other countries. And I'm reminded that 36 years ago, to date myself, when I was a high school student in Pennsylvania and was lucky to go to Penn State's research reactor, and actually as a high school student used that facility to do neutron activation analysis. This is something, very few students really had access to even at that time, and even certainly not this time. Our research reactor capabilities in this country have really gone down, and this is something that needs more adequate attention. With that, Ady, you ready? Right. So Ady Setiawan is from Indonesia originally. He is a graduate student at Texas A&M. You could read more about him in your handout just to save time. And he also came highly recommended from another Texas A&M graduate student we work with, Stephen Horowitz. Speaking of the Next Generation Safeguards Initiative, that's how I met Stephen. And that's because I'm a professor or lecturer at the Next Generation Safeguards Initiative at Brookhaven National Laboratory in June. And it's always a great opportunity to meet talented young people like those you see here today. So, Ady, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yanuar Ady Setiawan. You are welcome to call me Ady for your convenience. I'm a master student at Texas A&M. I'm taking nuclear engineering with non-proliferation specialization, and I'm from Indonesia. So, in this opportunity, I would like to share my experience and perspective as an international student who pursue nuclear security education in the US. In this presentation, I will cover 3 topics: the impact of support from PNS, Partnership of Nuclear Security, to Universitas Gadjah Mada, my previous university in Indonesia, in terms of nuclear security education development. And the second topic is about NSP, Nuclear Security Science and Policy Institute at Texas A&M, and their contribution to nuclear security education nationally and globally. And the last topic I will cover about the opportunity for international students in optimizing their nuclear security education in the US. Move to the first slide. So, since 2012, PNS has been supporting UGM to develop and enhance nuclear security topics in the nuclear engineering program through several activities, such as facilitating the faculties and students to INMM annual meeting and faculty visit to 6 universities in the United States. And then there are also curriculum development program, professional development program for the faculties. And also in 2013, PNS supported UGM to build INMM student chapter at UGM. And since then, nuclear security topics was introduced by the faculties to the students through several courses. In this picture, you can see that there is a synergy of courses, synergy of 4 courses here. And in this synergy, the student groups from different courses was assigned on a 1 semester project to develop such as safety and security system for medical isotope production facility, or to develop nuclear industry and business, but with also there's a task to build like security system for the transportation, security system for the facility that they develop in this project. And also at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester, there were questionnaires given to the students to measure their confidence level of understanding about nuclear security topics. So if you see in the graph, this is the result of the questionnaires. The lower the number, it indicates the lower confidence level of the students on the nuclear security subjects, and the higher the number, it indicates the higher confidence level of the students. You can see at the beginning of the semester, most of the students were in category 1, 2, 3. And at the end of the semester, you can see that it shifted to category 5, 6, and 7, most of the students. And the similar trend also happened in 2014 and 2015. But if we look closer, we will see that the percentage of the students at the beginning of the semester in category 1, 2, and 3 is decreasing throughout the year, year by year. And the percentage of the students were in category 5, 6, and 7 were increasing every year. It is believed that INMM student chapter events throughout the year, throughout the semester, had an impact to this positive progress. And all the INMM events were supported by PNS. Next. So this is the main product of the partnership between UGM and PNS. So there was a new nuclear engineering curriculum for undergraduate program. You can see in this first table, there are 24 out of 27 credits in which nuclear security, nuclear safety, and nuclear safeguards introduced to the students. It is required to all nuclear engineering undergraduate students. And if the students are taking nuclear energy technology concentration, there are 20 credits required in which the nuclear safety, security, and safeguards introduced to the students. And also, as a complement, there are 12 credits as an elective course which provided by the department to the students. So I think this is impressive improvement for my previous university. And then right now I'm studying at the NESP at Texas A&M University. So NESP is a multidiscipline organization at Texas A&M University, which combines student researcher and experts from Nuclear Engineering Department and Bush School of Government and Public Service to address the complex nuclear threats and proliferation problem by involving both policy and technology in nuclear security and safeguards. NESP provides a robust and multidiscipline technical graduate program. It requires 32 credits for master's degree, and it requires 64 credits for PhD student. I want to share with you about one of the classes. This is interesting classes. So in this nuclear non-proliferation and arms control. So in this class, there is a one semester simulation project in which student groups are assigned to utilize open source intelligence and data provided by the faculty to do a weekly investigation about certain case. For example, the first group has to investigate nuclear and radiological material-based device after a discovery of nuclear weapon material manufacturing facility in a hidden cave. And the second group, they have to investigate a significant deficit of nuclear material which was shipped from a country to another country. And the third group, they have to analyze and determine the capability of a suspicious undeclared nuclear facility. And the last group, they got a project to verify a report of suspected nuclear weapon tests and determine the location by doing seismic analysis. I think this is a nice project. It gives expansion of the knowledge on diverse approach in facing nuclear security and non-proliferation issues. And also in this, there's also another class, nuclear fuel cycle and nuclear material safeguards. In spring semester, in this class we have project to design a safeguard system in a nuclear facility such as fuel fabrication, nuclear reactor or nuclear spent fuel reprocessing facility. And another thing is interesting from NESP is they have in the website, they have an educational resources for it. It is free and available for the worldwide students and professional. It is called Nuclear Security and Safeguards Education Portal. Each module consists of reading materials, videos, links to additional resources, and self-assessment quiz. It is essential and beneficial supplement worldwide. It is from basic topic to advanced topic. You can access it like from everywhere. Also, another thing is important for the nuclear security education is this one, nuclear facility experience. So NESP got a funding from NNSA to organize a nuclear facility experience program where university students or a researcher from national laboratories can apply to go and visit nuclear facility in United Kingdom or in Japan to see and discuss with the facility operator and the practitioner in the facility about the applied security and safeguards measures in the facility. I think this is really give the students insight and field experience knowledge to complement their basic knowledge which they got in the class. NESP also held many short course and workshop for nuclear security development throughout the nations in the world. In the next slide, I want to share the opportunity for international students. So I was trying to look for the fellowship which is available for international students. Unfortunately, all of the consortium grant from NNSA is not available for international students. But on the other hand, the fellowship, research project, and funding from private institutions such as Stanton Foundation, CSIS, Herbert Schofield Jr. Peace Fellowship Program, they are open to international students. It can be used to optimize the nuclear security education for international students. In terms of internship in national laboratory, I tried to look for nuclear security related internship programs in the national laboratories in the US. But from what I found, in Idaho National Laboratory and Oak Ridge National Laboratory are the most open in terms of nuclear security education, internship programs for international students. And I also take a look at the summer short course. I think this can be optimized by international students. There are several summer short courses which are open to international students. Thank you.
Ady, thank you very much. Well, all three of our students covered a lot of ground, a lot of different themes. And actually, our last speaker, I gave him a set of challenges, and I'm glad he touched on that issue at the end about opportunities for international students, because this is, frankly, a concern of mine or a concern of ours in our FAS nuclear education project. As he indicated, the National Nuclear Security Administration has millions of dollars, which is a great thing, for U.S. students, U.S. national students in these programs. There are 3 consortia schools right now, so centered around University of California, Berkeley, University of Michigan, and North Carolina State are these consortia at bringing in other universities. And this is terrific. We want to have this continue. There's even talk about having a 4th consortium. But a big gap that we're seeing, and that I've had Ady look at, and I'll have others look at, is what are the opportunity for non-American students studying here so they can get actively involved in nuclear policy research, safety and security issues that we're talking about today. So just wanted to highlight that for you. We do have now some time, roughly 15 minutes for questions before I introduce our final speaker, Dr. Holdren. So anyone have any particular questions for our speakers, or even just some brief comments about any of the issues we've raised on this panel? For us, they're very clear. Yeah, yes, sir, right there. Please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Reed Skaggs. I'm interested, did you all follow a traditional STEM
education path to get to where you are today, or did you take regular classes like every other child does, going through K through 12?
Yeah, normally the Nigerian education system follows either you do STEM or it's something we call commercial, which is looking at the business progress in education. So I followed the STEM path, studied sciences in my high school, and then progressed to the university to study electrical electronics, and then proceeded to the US to continue my education.
So yeah, I was when I was in high school, I chose the natural science as my major, and in my undergrad, I was taking nuclear engineering in the Universitas Gadjah Mada in Indonesia.
I would also have to agree. My background is a very traditional STEM. In high school, we didn't have any sort of concentrations, but I did follow the College of Science to get my physics degree. Now I'm in the College of Engineering to get my engineering degrees. So I would say it's very traditional.
But there are opportunities for political science students, international relations students to get engaged in these issues. I used to be an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. I did that for 7 years. Most of my students were from the political science background, and a number of them ended up finding jobs at the National Nuclear Security Administration, Department of Energy, International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations, et cetera, the State Department, even a Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So there are pathways for non-STEM or non-science and engineering majors to get into the nuclear policy, even nuclear security, more technical fields. I think as long as they have that coursework and they can get up to speed on those technologies and to understand that, beyond just, cocktail hour, conversation knowledge about how a nuclear bomb works, they need to know more than that, but they don't need to have, detailed understanding like I think many of these students here do. Hannah talked about working on nuclear detection technologies. She quickly got up to speed, it looks like, to get involved in the cutting edge of this research. And if someone with a technical background can do that, someone with a policy background, they don't need to know the technical details in great depth. They need to know enough to be able to make good decisions when it comes to policy and funding. Yes. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. One good thing about the University of Tennessee program is you actually have the technical side, and also you have like the group looking at the policy side of nuclear engineering technology. I happen to fall in one of such group working with my professor, and also transiting from nuclear engineering, which is like traditional, like technical department, into the Bredesen Center for Interdisciplinary Education. The advantage at the Bredesen Center is that you actually follow two knowledge breed paths. One is the entrepreneurial path, and the other one is like the policy path. Personally, I chose to follow the policy path. Working in the government in Nigeria, I believe looking at policy that would enhance the implementation of nuclear technology in Nigeria would be the best. How do I communicate between lawmakers in Nigeria and the scientists? Like trying to sell my experience as an engineer to the non-engineers on the importance of technology is one of the very good things, and I just followed the Bredesen Center to go that route.
Thank you, Stephen. Very good points. Rodney Wilson.
If I could follow up with Stephen, in Nigeria, given some of the comments made earlier about the importance of culture and expertise all the way up the chain of the organization, in your mind, or do you have information that would suggest that Nigeria has a pretty strong culture, even at the executive levels, and experience to be able to manage effectively the nuclear, to the extent that there's a nuclear industry in Nigeria? If not, you might be the future of that industry, those executives.
Yeah, to answer to that question, I'll start by saying yes. Nigeria has the wherewithal in terms of knowledge and wealth of experience, not in the nuclear technology. Looking probably on the internet or searching or probably getting in touch with the Nigerian embassy, you actually agree with me that Nigerians are doing so well everywhere around the world. And one of the very good things that is happening in Nigeria, compared to in the past, where you see most scientists in Nigeria like relocating to other parts of the world, the challenges in Nigeria now calls for like everybody getting involved. And such as me, I'm a young man. I also like to live a quality life. Thinking about gaining my experience here and then going back home to implement what I've learned here should say a lot about the direction in which Nigeria is going. And I'm not the only one like trying to do this. I have seen so many young students like myself hoping to study and then going back to implement that. Aside that, the electricity challenge in Nigeria calls for electricity generation technology that would be tangible, that supports our base load to the extent that we don't need to look around for infrastructural development anywhere in the world. Infrastructural development is tied to ability to generate electricity at a lower and efficient cost.
John Holdren.
Yeah, this follows up Dr. Skaggs' question, which each of you addressed by talking about the pathway you followed in terms of the kinds of courses that were available to you, the emphases in those courses. And of course, we learned important and interesting things from each of you about how having hands-on experience and understanding why the science and technology you're studying really matters has been important. But the other real challenge, I think, in STEM education is understanding better what inspires young people to decide in the first place that they're interested in science, interested in technology, and want to pursue the opportunities that are there. I'd be interested in knowing from each of you how and when you decided you were interested in that path as opposed to some other path.
Start with Hannah, work down. Yeah.
I'll go ahead and start then. Yeah, I've been interested in science and technology since, I don't know, as long as I can remember. My parents, I think, were very pivotal in making sure that I was always exposed to these sort of things and always making sure that I at least had a general interest in STEM. I don't think they really cared if I necessarily became a physicist or a nuclear engineer or a chemist or a biologist or really anything, but just to make sure I could, understand like what's going on in science and technology. And as a little kid, I wanted to work on like a Star Trek ship or something like that. I thought I wanted to be a warp engineer. I thought that was so cool, and I was like, what can I do to make this technology possible? And I think it definitely helps that having science and technology and sci-fi kind of, I think recently kind of coming back is like really cool with all the new Star Wars movies and all the new Star Trek movies, can definitely make a difference and help kind of normalize, STEM as like not just this nerdy thing that people without social lives do. We're people too. Scientists are people too, and
Hashtag.
I might tweet that after.
Go for it.
But no, and I think it's just a combination of all that. I honestly don't think if it weren't for my parents constantly being encouraging, and I had a lot of really good math and science teachers also in especially middle school. Probably my 7th grade math teacher actually was probably the one that really cemented that for me. And then of course, all throughout high school and whatnot. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but it started well before I came to undergraduate or graduate school.
So when I was in high school, I wanted to make a mutant. No, but no. Actually, there was a study trip when to some kind of like space research center, and there was a lecture about the sun, and I was interested in the lecture because it was talking about the sun and its fusion energy. So that's why I was interested in nuclear engineering, and then I decided to go to nuclear engineering. But then at the end of my study in the 3rd or 4th year, somehow I feel like there is a gap between engineering people and the policy people, and also there is also a new issue. I was in 2013. That was my 3rd year, and the partnership of nuclear security came to UGM, and so there was like nuclear security issues came to my department. So, and then I was interested because there was no one interested in that field. That's what makes me interested, because there is someone has to fill that place. for Indonesia. That's why I decided to fill the place in terms of nuclear security and safeguards for Indonesia.
In terms of my experience, I happen to be surrounded by engineers. My dad being an accountant, and then my older brothers, I have 3 of them, are like science inclined. So I kind of follow suit to also become an engineer, and seeing that, well, apart from just following suit, it's, highly paying job, and I would want to live a comfortable life. So I decided to go for the engineering side of science. And also, presently, I'm the president of the Institute for Nuclear Materials Management chapter in UT. And one of the things which we have started doing is to really encourage the high school seniors in terms of trying to be interested in doing science. And there is a program which we are hosting soon. It's called Pick Nuke, which we intend to host, like telling them the importance of nuclear engineering to the world.
Thank you very much. To stay on schedule, I don't see any other urgent questions. But one more question in the back. Yes, ma'am. We'll take you, and then I'll introduce John Holdren.
Hi, I'm Murphy Gonzalez. A question for the 3 of the speakers today. With your, have you experienced any challenges as to your specific backgrounds, and with regard to your choice of profession, like in the science and engineering, especially for Hannah as a woman, and the others from that you are here in the States and you're from other countries? Thank you.
Hannah, go ahead. Yeah.
So as far as challenges in getting into nuclear specifically with my background in physics, as I had mentioned, I did do nuclear physics research, but I had only taken 1 nuclear science class before going into graduate school. So I kind of walked into graduate school. One of my first classes I took was a reactor physics course. And even though, I understood the physics behind all these things, I didn't know hardly anything about reactors. So that was definitely a challenge, trying to get up to speed with all this sort of thing. I'd been trained very well in, physics and the interaction of radiation with matter and how to build a radiation detector, but not too terribly much else. So that was certainly a challenge. As far as being a woman in STEM, I don't know too terribly many women who haven't dealt with something. I would say that 99% of what I deal with is everyone is just so supportive and encouraging, and they're like, wow, you're a woman who does nuclear engineering. What? That exists. But it really, the sad thing is it kind of takes just like one downer to really just kind of ruin your day and ruin your mood, and really just be like, wow, am I supposed to be here? Because I'm not sure sometimes, but overall it's a very supportive and encouraging field, and I'm very happy and proud for that.
So the struggle that I'm facing is actually I'm from math. So when I was in my country, I was in a high school, but I didn't really conquering the math that needed to pursue this advanced degree somehow. So that's why until now I'm still struggling with the mathematical. It turns out I realized that myself is not like a pure scientist or pure engineer, because I also has interest in social policy and social policy study, which I will prefer that to combine what I know about the technical and engineering stuff with the policy and social study. That's it.
Well, the only challenge I've seen so far, which the professor actually helped to conquer, my first 3 weeks in the United States to study was very terrible. That's at the University of Tennessee. I'd attended a summer program at the Texas A&M University on nuclear security, and then I transited from there to gaining a master's admission at the UT. My first 3 weeks, one of the professors talks very fast, and I wouldn't understand anything in the class. I'll go back to my room and then cry. And I was thinking, is this meant for me? Am I meant to be here? The communication barrier was so high that, okay, now I would have to leave the class and go back, leaving other classes that I'm taking to actually go through his lectures. But I kind of talked to one of my colleague in my research group, and I said, wow, that's one of the best professors that we have here. Let's go talk to him. I went to him, lo and behold, he gave me a recording of his class for the whole semester. So I would listen to that tape like 3 times before going into the class. And that was how I integrated into the nuclear engineering program at UT, and that has been like my best experience so far in the United States.
Wow, that's a fitting end for a great panel. Please join me in thanking all 3 of our presenters. I also want to thank the great questions we got, especially those last 2. Those are really spot on and really brought out some of the opportunities and challenges faced by the students we see here today and other students as well. There's many, many behind them. And I think we're probably in a process of, oh, good. I think John's slides are loaded up. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. John Holdren, and someone I've admired for many, many years, a hero of mine, a hero of FAS. John served as chairman of FAS, I don't know, 30 years ago. I don't want to think, okay, something like that. Yeah. But, oh no. But we honored it. So I want to tell, because it's a really brief story. So it was my first year on the job as president of FAS about 7 years ago. And working with the staff, we started our awards ceremony again. And so we had this plan for the fall of 2010, this award ceremony, and everyone agreed that John Holdren should receive the Public Service Award, and we were lining that up, and he was President Obama's science advisor, chief science advisor, so we had to work all that out, work with his schedule, got that lined up. One of the other award winners, Barbara Pyle, said, "You know who should be your master of ceremonies?" I said, "Who?" She said, "Bianca Jagger." Who those of you who are old enough know Bianca Jagger is married to Mick Jagger, and Bianca is very famous in her own right, and she runs an NGO in London. So we flew her in, and the Washington Post had this little news story about the event, and they gave it the title, if I remember the title correctly, something like Beauty and the Geek. Beauty and the Science Geek. John got called the Science Geek. So, or maybe you're the beauty, and Bianca Jagger was a science geek. But they had these headshots of John Holdren and Bianca Jagger had this leopard, spotted evening gown, and looking very, elegant and stylish at the same time. And John gave a terrific talk that night, and it was a terrific event. We actually had the Carnegie Institution of Science at that time. Dick was the head of that organization. So it's great to bring them together again for today's event. And those who know that John's work, long track record of many accomplishments, accepted or at least gave a speech, Nobel Peace Prize for the Pugwash Organization when they won the Nobel Peace Prize back in the mid-90s. Thank you, 95. I was going to say 95, 96. Thank you. Of course, yeah, you would know, of course. And so he's a leader in that organization, a leader in many organizations. And it's also, Stephen made a comment about, engineers in countries other than the United States have this track record of serving as national leaders. You think about China, a lot of engineers and scientists are serving as leaders there and in other countries. We don't really have that so much in our country. We have one PhD physicist now in Congress, Bill Foster. We have one PhD mathematician, Jerry McNerney, in Congress. Rush Holt, who's now the head of AAAS, had served as a congressman, and Vern Ehlers as well from Michigan. So we have very few. I can name them kind of one hand in recent years, those who have had PhDs and STEM topics who have actually served in Congress. And I don't want to make this a political event by any means, but I mentioned, those are Democrats and Republicans, the ones I just mentioned off the top of my head, who've served and are still serving. And so this is also raising awareness about the need for scientists and engineers, not just to be science advisors like Dr. Holdren, but also get involved in the political process as well, to make sure we have evidence-based, science-based thinking, facts, guiding our public policy decisions. And as we've seen from all our 5 previous speakers, and Dr. Holdren will not let us down. He's all about facts and evidence and critical thinking. And it's a great pleasure to have him here as our final speaker for this event. John, please come up.
Well, thank you, Charles, and thanks to all of you for being here. It's a real pleasure to be part of this program with such a great set of colleagues, and most recently this terrific set of graduate students who remind us of what it takes and how important it is to nurture the next generation in this domain. Well, this summit is about science and security, and 2 of the great science and security challenges of our time are, 1, how to maximize the benefits while minimizing the risks of nuclear energy, and 2, how do we master the climate change challenge? How do we ameliorate the drivers of climate change before global climate change becomes truly catastrophic? And those 2 science and security challenges meet in the question of the extent to which nuclear energy can make a major contribution to addressing the climate change challenge. I'm going to start with some numbers. In fact, this is going to be a number-heavy talk. I always tell my students in my introductory courses on science and technology policy that the numbers are never everything, but they're almost always something, which means it is unwise to think about policy issues without some connection to the underlying quantitative realities. So this is a partial picture of energy, economy, and carbon dioxide in 2015 for the world and for the 5 largest emitters of carbon dioxide, the most important anthropogenic greenhouse gas. And you see a number of interesting things here. One is, to the astonishment of many, when you correct for purchasing power parity, China is already the biggest economy in the world. They've passed the United States as the biggest economy in the world. They have far passed the United States as the biggest energy user in the world and the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world. India relatively recently passed Russia to take over the 3rd position in emissions, and the top 5 are fleshed out there. If I'd had room for Brazil, what you would see is somewhat smaller CO2 emissions from fossil fuels from Brazil, but 200 to 400 gigatons a year of carbon in deforestation emissions. But the other very striking thing about this picture, and all too few people in our society recognize this, the world as a whole is still more than 80% dependent on fossil fuels for its primary energy. You know, there's a tremendous amount of discussion of nuclear energy, tremendous amount of discussion of renewable energy, but the fact is we are still overwhelmingly a fossil fuel dependent world, and that stands at the center of the climate change challenge. Picture of global greenhouse gas emissions, not just CO2, but the other major anthropogenic greenhouse gases expressed in CO2 equivalent over the 30 years between 1985 and 2014. See the emissions rising, but looking like they're starting to level off. And in fact, when you look at the 2015 numbers, they've actually started to come down a little. We don't yet know, of course, whether that's a fluctuation or a trend. It would certainly be nice if it's a trend and the world really did peak in 2014. We shall see. And again, what you see there is about 2/3 of all of the greenhouse gas emissions, not just CO2, but methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons. 2/3 of that come from the energy sector. So again, the energy challenge is intimately intertwined with the climate challenge. In fact, I like to say that climate is the toughest part of the energy problem, and energy is the toughest part of the climate problem. If you look at projections for just the electricity sector, and about 37% of world energy goes to generating electricity, about 40% of CO2 emissions come from the electric sector. And what you see under business as usual, these are the U.S. Energy Information Administration's projections reference case. What you see is we continue to be a fossil fuel dominated world. The contribution from renewables does go up. but so does the contribution from natural gas go up. And natural gas is the least CO2 emitting of the major fossil fuels, but it still emits a lot of CO2. So basically what this thing is telling us, in combination with what we know about the state of climate change, is that business as usual is not acceptable. We have to do better than business as usual if we are to get our arms around the climate change part of this challenge. So let me summarize just a few realities about the magnitude, again, a numerical approach, the magnitude of the need for emissions reductions. If we want to achieve a 50% chance of the global average surface air temperature increase being 2 degrees C or less, which is the goal that has been embraced under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, reiterated at the Paris Conference in 2015, December 2015, and again in Morocco in 2016, to get that 50% chance of staying below 2 degrees C means that in 2050, the global emissions of carbon dioxide have to be at least 7 to 9 billion tons of contained carbon per year below the business as usual picture, a piece of which we were looking at a moment ago. That's a cut of 50% or more from the business as usual emissions by 2050. So it's interesting to talk about ways to get those reductions. What does it take to get a reduction of just 1 gigaton per year? We need 7 to 9. What does it take to get 1? And this analysis is due to a very famous paper by Rob Socolow and Steve Piccola of Princeton in 2004 that looked at what they called the wedge approach to meeting the climate change challenge. You get a bunch of little wedges and they add up to a big wedge. What are those little, in quotes, gigaton of carbon per year wedges look like? One of them, energy use in buildings. If we could cut energy use in buildings by 20 to 25% below what's expected under business as usual, and I should say business as usual already includes a continuing improvement in the energy efficiency of buildings and the appliances in them. But we have to do much better. If you could do 20 to 25% better than that, you could get a gigaton per year. If we made the fuel economy of 2 billion cars 60 miles per gallon instead of 30, that gets you 1 gigaton per year. 2 billion cars, 60 instead of 30 to get a gigaton. If we were to achieve carbon capture and storage for 800 1-gigawatt coal-burning power plants, that gets you a gigaton per year. If we were to replace coal-burning power plants with 700 1-gigawatt nuclear plants, that's what it takes to get 1 gigaton of carbon per year. 700 big nuclear plants instead of coal-burning plants of the same size. Renewables, what does it take to get a gigaton per year? 1 million 2-megawatt wind turbines or 2,000 1-gigawatt photovoltaic power plants replacing coal power plants. That's what it takes to get a gigaton per year. It doesn't take a lot of staring at these kinds of numbers to realize that we need an all-of-the-above approach. That is, no one of these options expanded as rapidly as we possibly could. No one of these options will do the job. We need a multiplicity of them. And I often say when people ask me, what can be the role of nuclear energy in confronting the climate change challenge, I say, we could still solve the climate change challenge without it, but it would be a whole lot easier to solve the climate change challenge with it if we can surmount the challenges that confront nuclear energy, expanding to the degree required to make a big impact. And that's what I'm going to talk about in what follows. Now, how much could we get from nuclear energy, and what are the challenges of getting it? Well, first of all, again, start with the numbers. The current contribution of nuclear energy worldwide, there are about 450 nuclear fission power reactors in the world. They generate a little less than 400 gigawatts of capacity. 29 countries have operational nuclear fission power reactors. They are generating, in 2015, they were generating 10.7% of world electricity, and that's actually down. The contribution as a share of world electricity generation has been falling. It was 17% in 2000, and now just under 11% in 2015. There are about 60 more reactors, totaling 60 gigawatts of capacity under construction They're in 15 countries. Only about half as many countries have nuclear reactors under construction as have operating nuclear reactors. Not a terrific sign in itself. All of those going into operation would bring the total, leaving aside any retirements in the meantime, would bring the total to about 500 reactors and 450 electrical gigawatts. In the United States, 99 operating power reactors in 2016, 100 gigawatts of capacity, generating just a shade under 20% of U.S. electricity in 2016. The 2016 numbers are now available for the United States, but not for the world as a whole. So it's important as an electricity generating source in the United States. Figuring out how to replace that 20%, if you had to do it quickly, would not be easy. And in fact, we face a challenge which Dick Meserve can give a better talk than I about, which is the impending pace of retirement of those existing reactors that we have. We are not assured of having 100 or so nuclear reactors going forward unless we are able to replace the ones that are slated to retire over the next couple of decades. As of November 2016, there were only 4 more under construction in the United States, totaling about 4.5 gigawatts. I mentioned here at the bottom that of the world's 450 reactors, a little more than 350 actually are light water reactors, and the rest are heavy water reactors, gas-cooled reactors, graphite moderated light water reactors, and just a couple of breeder reactors. So what are the factors that govern the expandability of nuclear energy in the United States and worldwide? Well, there are a number of them. One, of course, is demand, economic growth, degree of electrification. If we electrify transport successfully, more electric vehicles, then electricity growth will increase correspondingly. Of course, driving in the other direction, the success of efforts to improve end-use efficiency, so you need less electricity to generate a given mix of goods and services. Secondly, the question of whether nuclear energy ultimately will be able to deliver non-electric energy products, high-temperature process heat, for example, hydrogen. Economics, of course, extremely important. The cost of electricity from nuclear energy and its competitors. Construction costs, risk premium, what happens if you commit yourself to build a 1 gigawatt nuclear plant and then electricity demand in that part of the grid actually doesn't grow as fast as you thought. The lumpiness of the investments, that is, nuclear energy is most economic in very large chunks, big reactors, gigawatt or so, which means you're betting a lot on the need for the reactor that you decide to build. It would be nice if we could make smaller reactors economic so that that lumpiness factor would be diminished. Of course, resource availability, supply of uranium versus cost, and the effect of resource availability on fuel cycle choice and the overall cost. Do we need to go to breeder reactors if we're going to massively expand nuclear energy? And if we do, what are the challenges of doing that? And of course, additional factors governing expandability, safety and environment. Comparison with alternatives with respect to safety and environmental impacts, both in fact and in perception. Radioactive waste management, reactor safety on the nuclear side versus the air pollution that comes from fossil fuels, land use questions associated with renewables, and again, a great benefit of nuclear energy, the impact on climate change, which is positive because nuclear energy does not emit carbon dioxide. And here I'll just make a small aside on, I think, one of the misguided arguments that's out there. People say, no, it isn't really true that nuclear energy is free of carbon dioxide emissions because our nuclear fuel enrichment plants are mostly run by fossil fuel power plants. I think that's a specious argument. The only fair way to examine the carbon dioxide impacts of an energy source are to assume that the energy input requirements from that source are provided by the same source, not blaming nuclear energy for the characteristics of coal-burning plants that currently happen to be feeding the enrichment plants. We could be feeding the enrichment plants with nuclear-generated electricity, and that's the fair comparison. Finally, international security. Energy dependence, independence, that's not a particularly important question for the United States because our energy dependence or independence largely depends on oil, and we use almost no oil to generate electricity. And since electricity is all we're currently getting from nuclear energy, it's not a independent issue for the United States, but it is for many other countries. Many other countries would be happy if they could reduce their dependence on imports of coal, or if they could reduce their dependence on imports of natural gas to generate electricity. But on the other side is the question of nuclear weapon proliferation. Can we ensure that the spread of nuclear energy technology does not spread nuclear weapons capability and the actual exercise of that capability for additional countries to acquire nuclear weapons? Can we ensure that the nuclear materials associated with nuclear energy generation are not misused by criminal or terrorist groups to create mayhem? So let me go through very quickly some numbers, more numbers, on these big questions. Cost of nuclear versus fossil fuel generation. These are figures from an MIT study of the future of the nuclear fuel cycle in 2010, a little out of date. Natural gas has actually gotten cheaper since then, although the natural gas numbers there offer three cases: cheap gas, more expensive gas, and really expensive gas, so that you can see what the effect is of changes in natural gas price. Also includes a column for what happens if you had a fee on carbon emissions of $25 a ton of carbon dioxide emitted. That's a number that is bandied about as an initial level should the country embrace a carbon tax. A lot of people talk about $25 a ton escalating over time, so they put the $25 a ton into the MIT analysis to see what it does, and you can see that the levelized cost of electricity from coal with a $25 a ton tax goes from 6.2 cents a kilowatt hour to 8.3, and you see the different numbers for natural gas, how much gas-fired electricity goes up depending on the price of natural gas in the first place. And the very last column with the same cost of capital, right now because of the risk premium, capital is more expensive for building a nuclear plant than for building a fossil fuel plant. And so if we solve that problem and capital costs the same for those plants, then nuclear energy's base case cost would go down from 8.4 cents a kilowatt hour to 6.6. So this already makes some suggestions implicitly about how you could go about addressing the economic challenges that nuclear energy has faced. I put at the bottom my personal view. I think it's actually highly likely that carbon charges much greater than $25 a ton will be in place by 2025. I strongly suspect that $25 a ton will be in place already by 2020. And the other point there is that small modular reactors could drop the unit cost and maybe the cost of energy if they work out well. So world uranium reserves and resources, this is something that I've been working on since the early 1970s when I was looking at the Atomic Energy Commission's projections of the use of nuclear energy and the alleged need to move very quickly to breeder reactors because of potential shortages of uranium. And I decided in the early 70s and published several papers to this effect that that argument was not correct, that there's a lot of uranium out there and that it could run the system for a long time. So here again are some numbers in units of metric tons of uranium, metric tons 1,000 kilograms. The term RURR stands for remaining ultimately recoverable resources. Very important distinction. People often focus on something called reserves. Reserves are the amount of material whose location is already known and which is economically extractable at current prices and with current technology. The ultimately recoverable resources are invariably much larger because you're going to find more, technology is going to get better, and prices are gradually going to rise if the stuff does become scarce. So, Australian Uranium Information Center, again, these numbers are a little out of date. I didn't have time to update all of a presentation I gave on this topic a few years ago, but they're not going to be very different. 30 million tons. The so-called Red Book, classic international source of information on uranium availability, to $130 a ton, 13 million. MIT 2010 study to $260 a ton, 100 million. Now, could we tolerate $260 a ton? That's several times more than we're paying today in the world for uranium. Well, the fact is that $260 a kilogram for uranium would still lead to lower nuclear generation costs than switching to breeder reactors with current technology. And I underline the point with current technology. It's one I'll come back to. Better technology might make breeders economic at a lower uranium cost, but current technology does not. And so that 100 million tons is a meaningful figure when you're asking the question, how long could we run a global nuclear energy system without shifting to breeder reactors? Extrapolating from the United States, global remaining ultimately recoverable resources are likely in the range of 60 to 180 million tons, which agrees with the MIT estimate in the middle of that range. Now, crucial point. In a conventional light water reactor with a once-through fuel cycle, no reprocessing, 1 million tons of uranium yields 400 exajoules or 13 terawatt years thermal, 4 terawatt years of electricity, 36 trillion kilowatt hours of electricity. The numbers matter. 100 million tons is 400 terawatt years. If in 2100 we had 3,500 gigawatts of nuclear, that would consume that would generate 3.2 electric terawatts per year. And so 100 metric tons, our current estimate of remaining ultimately recoverable resources, would run that system, 3,500 gigawatts of once-through light water reactors would run that system for over 100 years. There is no urgency to switching to fuel reprocessing and breeder reactors on grounds of uranium availability based on what we know now. There might later be a case if breeder technology gets better and makes it cheaper to reprocess and recycle, but there is no basis for an early switch. Alternative reference points. This is again is a table directly from the MIT study. Reference points for nuclear deployments in 2050 in electrical gigawatts for different assumptions about electricity growth rates and different assumptions about nuclear market share. The highest case, electricity growth averages 2.5% per year, and the nuclear generation market share is 25% rather than the 17% that it was in the year 2000. You have 1,550, basically, gigawatts of nuclear reactors worldwide, about 4 times as many as we have today. So you need a 4-fold increase at the high electricity growth scenario just to get to a quarter of electricity generation coming from nuclear energy. This is not nuclear energy solving the whole problem. This is nuclear energy solving, in a sense, a quarter of the problem. So I did some calculations of my own. I calculated how much nuclear would be needed to double nuclear share from the 2000 figure of 17%, double it to a third. Let's not settle for a quarter. Let's go for a third of world electricity, given the business as usual electricity growth scenario. The answer is we'd need 1,700 gigawatts of nuclear capacity in 2050, or a little more, roughly 1,400 gigawatts more than existed in 2000, 1,300 gigawatts more than exist in 2017. If those 400 gigawatts of additional nuclear capacity in 2050 all replaced what would otherwise have been coal-fired power plants lacking carbon dioxide capture technology, the avoided emissions would be 2 of those wedges. We'd get 2 gigatons of carbon per year out of that. Again, we need 7 to 9. In this very ambitious nuclear scenario, we could get 2. This underscores the point I made earlier. It is easier to solve the climate change problem with nuclear energy. It doesn't solve the whole problem. If you had to get those 2 gigawatts those 2 gigatons of carbon elsewhere, it would be conceivable, but you'd have to push all those other dimensions, the renewables, the efficiency, the vehicles would have to be pushed harder. All right. The implications of operating a nuclear energy system at that scale. Consider 1,700 gigawatts of nuclear capacity in 2050. If they were light water reactors on the once-through fuel cycle, enrichment of their fuel would require 250 million separative work units per year. Diversion of 0.1% of that enrichment capacity to the production of highly enriched uranium for weapons would be enough to make 20 gun-type or 80 implosion-type nuclear bombs. That was 1 part in 1,000 of the enrichment that would be needed would be enough to make a very dangerous quantity of nuclear weapons. What that underscores is you have to have very, very good control of who's using their enrichment capacity for what. If half of those reactors were recycling their plutonium, still light water reactors, but half of them recycle the plutonium, the associated flow of separated, directly weapon-usable plutonium would be 170,000 kilograms per year. And diversion of 0.1% of that, 1 part in 1,000 of that, would make 30 implosion-type bombs. Again, if you're going to do that, you better have very, very good control. Much better, by the way, than anybody claims we have today. The spent fuel production in the once-through case, if this is all once through, would be 34,000 tons of spent fuel per year. Total production to date is about 350,000 tons of spent fuel. So we would be producing every year about 1/10 as much has been produced over all history from commercial nuclear energy to date. Safety and environment. We'd probably consider reactor safety in a world of 1,700 or more reactors to be adequate if the probability of a major core melt accident could be held to the range of 1 in a million per reactor per year. That probably is already achieved by the best designs that we have today, at least absent deliberate attack or sabotage. We need, I think, to bolster our defenses against deliberate attack or sabotage. Probably even if we don't go to this level, we should bolster those defenses. But if we go to this level, we would certainly have to. Radioactive waste. We're going to have to show radioactive waste to be manageable without significant worker or public radiation exposure in the short to medium term, with the expectation of a problem-free permanent solution in the long term. I think, and I hope Dick Meserve doesn't disagree, that this is achievable technically, without doubt. The question really is whether it is achievable in terms of public acceptance. In my view, in the MIT view, in the view of the Blue Ribbon Commission, the way to do it is to build interim engineered storage facilities for the short to medium term, 50 to 100 years, and in that period, use that time to look very carefully at the best geologic environments for storing this stuff in the long term. Proliferation. Proliferation resistance should be increased, must be increased if we go to this level, by a combination of both technical and institutional means. In the short term, I believe this means avoiding the use of highly enriched uranium. How's my time doing? Okay, I'll be done in a couple minutes. I'll be done in a couple minutes. Avoiding the use of highly enriched uranium, too easy to make bombs from it, and only a small fraction of the enrichment capacity diverted to that purpose would be a problem. So we certainly don't want to be using it deliberately so that there's high enriched uranium flying all over the place. Secondly, minimizing horizontal proliferation of enrichment facilities by offering fuel on attractive terms with take-back of the spent fuel, and by establishing fuel banks so that we don't maximize the number of countries that are doing their own enrichment. Third, minimizing the inventories of separated plutonium by minimizing reprocessing and maximizing disposition. If you look at the inventory numbers today of how much separated plutonium already exists in the world, it's enough to basically replicate the existing major power nuclear arsenals. I mean, it's a very large quantity of plutonium. We need to minimize it. We need to minimize reprocessing, and we need to maximize the disposition of the separated plutonium that already exists into forms where it cannot be recovered for use in weapons. Japan alone, the last time I looked, had 30 tons of separated plutonium, some of it in country and some of it still in reprocessing plants in Europe. You think of 30 tons, that's 30,000 kilograms. You know how many kilograms of plutonium it takes to make a devastating nuclear weapon? A round number, about the average for the US arsenal is 4. 4 kilograms in Japan alone has 30,000. We got to reduce those stocks. We need to improve the protection and safeguards for whatever stocks exist. And then I turn very quickly, and I'm going to provide this deck so that you can distribute it. I'm not going to read all these recommendations. These are the MIT fuel cycle study recommendations, very similar to the Blue Ribbon panel. recommendations in terms of safety, very similar to the conclusions that have been reached about reactor safety from efforts that Dick Meserve has been involved in. Many of the recommendations I've mentioned already. With respect to innovative reactor and fuel cycle options, we should definitely be doing integrated system studies and experiments to see if we can make breeder reactors, which are much more efficient in their use of uranium, more attractive. But right now, the best way to facilitate the expansion of nuclear energy worldwide is to make it as inexpensive as possible, as safe as possible, as proliferation resistant as possible, as simple as possible. And that means not moving to reprocessing and recycling plutonium. I submit that the MIT recommendations are the right ones, that they're sound, and not by accident, they're what the Obama administration tried to do. Thank you very much.
And John, thank you very much for a far-thinking, far-reaching, and also sobering presentation, a real tour de force. I know we're pretty much right at the 3 o'clock point, so those of you who have to dash, we understand, but if those of you who can stick around, we can stick around for another 5-10 minutes if you have any questions for John, and then we'll adjourn the session. For hands, comments.
Here's one.
Milton Honig, microphone.
What do you see for Iran after the JCPOA period of, let's say, 15 years, 10 to 15 years? They could go in the direction of putting, I think, IR-8 centrifuges in the Natanz plant and get 1 million SWUs per year. Is that something that we want to see?
I think it's not something we want to see. First of all, I have to say that I very much hope that the Iran nuclear agreement lasts for 15 years. It's not obvious that it will, either from the U.S. side or from the Iran side. The current U.S. administration is publicly questioning whether that was a good agreement. I think it was an excellent agreement. I think we owe a great debt of gratitude not only to Secretary Kerry, but to Energy Secretary Ernie Moniz, without whose technical insights and relationship to his Iranian counterpart, we probably would not have gotten that agreement. I've always considered the proliferation business to be a race between expanding technical capacity on the one side and expanding political wisdom on the other. What you have to hope is that political wisdom will have advanced by 15 years from now, that Iran will not be interested any longer in acquiring nuclear weapons. That's a very optimistic hope, but the possibilities are they will have reached that point. A second possibility is we will want to negotiate a follow-on agreement that provides for Iranian capability to feed their civil nuclear reactors without providing them a capability to quickly develop sufficient quantities of bomb-usable material to have a nuclear weapon. But it's a tough problem. And again, I hope we can start from the position that that agreement lasts for 15 years.
Micah Lowenthal.
John, you mentioned...
Hey, Micah. Didn't even see you back there until you... Micah was my student.
Right. It's good to continue to
years
be taught
ago.
by you.
Neither one of us will say how long.
You mentioned the potential economic benefits of small modular reactors. If that's realized, could you say what you think would be the game changer there and how likely that is?
Well, there are a couple of game changers. One is the market for small modular reactors, all else being equal, would be larger than the market for gigawatt scale reactors for a couple of reasons. One, the less lumpy a risk investment makes it less risky for companies to invest in them. Number two, they make sense in smaller electricity grids than the size of grid that you need to absorb a 1 gigawatt reactor. So the idea is larger numbers and smaller size opens the possibility of mass production of standardized designs. I mean, basically, one of the reasons that nuclear energy has been so expensive in terms of construction cost is the extent to which these are custom-built plants, largely having to be constructed on site rather than constructed in a factory and shipped to the site. And in principle, modular reactors could address those shortcomings. In practice, we haven't yet seen, I think, the specific design that is so promising that folks are willing to run with it and do this experiment of whether, in fact, you can get the number of orders and the production technologies to really get the cost down. But I think it remains an intriguing concept.
Couple more questions or questioners. Stephen and Ambassador Graham.
Yeah, if nuclear waste is one of the challenges of operating a nuclear plant, and then also carbon emission is one of the challenges in operating a coal-fired plant. For nuclear waste mitigation, plants are being made to contribute, I think, 1 cent per kilowatt of energy generated.
Per kilowatt hour.
Per kilowatt hour energy generated. So what is, the level of policy or government support to also make coal-fired plants pay for carbon emission?
Well, it's a very good question. If you ask the question, what would carbon capture and sequestration add to the cost per kilowatt hour of coal-fired electricity generation? Let's say that the baseline cost is 6 cents a kilowatt hour without carbon capture and sequestration. With current technologies or technologies that can be reasonably analyzed at scale, the cost of coal-fired electricity would probably go from 6 cents to 9 or 10 cents. In other words, the increase would be from 50% to 2/3 in generation cost. The increase in delivered cost would be smaller because generation cost in the United States is only about half of the cost of delivering electricity. It wouldn't be unimaginable, but it would make coal less competitive against nuclear, and it would make it less competitive against renewables, much less competitive against gas. It's already the case in the United States that we're building no new coal plants because gas and renewables are cheaper. And gas virtually everywhere and renewables in a lot of places. But for the long term, it matters. And if you include in your strategy the all of the above strategy and say we should be doing everything, and you realize that particularly countries like China and India are going to burn a lot of coal for a long time to come, then it is very important that we invest in the technologies to bring that cost of carbon capture and sequestration down. And if we could bring it down to the point where it increased the cost of coal-fired electricity generation by 1.5 cents rather than 3 or 4 cents, I think you'd have an interesting future for coal burning.
And finally, Ambassador Graham.
John, John, that was a really good talk. So much information there. There might be a few minor areas where I might question something here.
I'd be happy to hear about those.
No, it would take too long. And I'm not sure the audience would want to hear that. But the one thing I do want to comment on in the race that you described between technology and political wisdom, I think overwhelmingly the important part of that is political wisdom, because it's very difficult to advance the cause of nonproliferation when we won't do anything about it here.
Absolutely. I didn't give that part of the talk in the interest of time, but I completely agree with you. I mean, the United States has no moral authority in the proliferation domain when we continue to sit on thousands of deliverable nuclear weapons and insist that despite having the strongest conventional forces in the world, we still need nuclear weapons in addition in order to protect our national interests.
And continue to keep open the test option, too.
Yeah, you bet. I'm in complete agreement on that. That just didn't happen to be the focus of my talk.
Maybe that's a good last question, Charles.
Good, indeed. I like it.
A very FAS type question, too. Thank you, Tom Graham and John Holdren. Well, let's thank John Holdren. Thank you so much. Well, it's formally adjourned. Thank you all for being here. Also, thank those looking at the webcast and those of you the webcast later. It's still got to be on YouTube, as I mentioned. And if so, anyone here, if there's so much information, lots of numbers, lots of ideas, you can go back and review parts of this conference, this summit Thank you again, and have a great day and weekend. All right. Great job. Yeah. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. This what we have. Good idea, Rosina. You know, I wish we had an FAS banner. We're in the process of frankly redoing our logo. Well, yeah, it's, oh, sure. Or maybe Frankie has a, hey, Frankie. Frankie, we want to have a group photo, please. Now we have to get Rodney and John to come over real quick.